Good morning, people. I'm in New York, so it's the afternoon. And I hope it's a little warmer by you than it is by me. But I just thank you for having me. I'm hoping that we can be open enough with each other to ask questions when it comes to you. If you have a question, you can put in the chat. Jessica will pick it up. But if you ask a question, then you'll be able to get on screen and then, I know who I'm talking to. But if you could just say your first name. And if you're incognito because of the recording, you can just say, Jane Doe is fine. Or whatever you want to be called. So I'm going to talk to you today about peer support and the peer drift. I think it's a critical piece to our work as peer specialists and peer support workers. So I'm going to get right into it. This is a little bit about the Alliance and its mission statement, that we're national and state change agents, that we've been really dedicated to improving services and policies and changing social conditions for people that we serve with mental health, substance use, and trauma-related challenges. So we are very much focused on recovery and rights, but as I like to call it, an immersion process for people that are coming out of state hospitalizations. And it's not just about living in the community and having an apartment and maybe a part-time job, but it's really about being part of a community in that maybe you like sports, so you go to the high school lacrosse games, or you like music, you go to the college concerts and things like that, and really taking a part in the community, not just as a person with mental health issues or other issues, but just as an individual within that community. So that's really especially important to me as the director of the Peer Bridger program. Our missions are here. The agency actually started in 1981. We were actually, until this year, called the New York Association of Psychiatric Rehabilitative Services. So we wanted to move away from more of the medical language, if you will. So we went to the Alliance for Rights and Recovery, which really speaks more to what we do. So, like I just said, we advocate, we educate, which is, part of my work is also traveling the country and really talking about peer roles, peer bridger model, and how we can incorporate into existing systems. The innovation of the peer bridger model was in 1994, and we continue to innovate new practices. And we celebrate. If you're ever in New York in October, you want to, give me a call, because I'll introduce you to our conference in October. We have about 700 people that come, all peers, and we really have a dynamic, not just schedule, but time together. It's a lot of fun, and I guess the best seller of this is our outdoor barbecue every year. So it really is a lot of fun to attend. So if you're in town, give me a call and I'll hook you up. These are the technical assistance states that we've been in to date. And we'll just jump on into this. And I know you all have a good sense of what peer specialists are. For those who may not, it's really about people who've been successful in their own recovery process, and they're willing and able to really help others experiencing the same situations to stay engaged in the recovery process. We are not a clinical support role. This is, we do not enter into that lane, if you will. We do offer other supports in the recovery process, mostly involving the relationship and moving people through the process by having a trusting, supportive relationship. So what does peer support look like? And again, I know you guys know this, so I'm going to speed through it. If you have any questions, chime in. But peer support is a relational way of being with people. It's a balance of power in relationships between peers. It's mutual support that promotes recovery. It's teaching and learning from each other. I don't think we can be in any relationships if that doesn't happen. We challenge each other when we get stuck. And it's moving towards what we want and the individual that we're working with wants. Peer values were named it peer bridge of values, but these are the values of all peers, and that it's that regardless of past experiences, we believe that everyone has the capacity to recover. That people don't need to get stuck in that role of patient for the rest of their lives. We believe that all people deserve the opportunity to fundamentally change their lives for the better. And that all people can get out of the hospital and stay out of the hospital and live a satisfying and self-directed life. And I think we can all agree with this, that we're all one, but we're different. And we're all different, but we're the same. And I think that's really something that we want to, keep in mind in the work that we do. So what is peer drift? Okay, so peer drift is when the role of the peer specialist starts to deviate and starts to move from the practices that distinguish peer support workers from clinical providers, right? So our lane is to create, that relationship, that confidentiality, that, trust that we have with people. It's not about, diagnosing or recommending medications or treatments and all those kind of things. And I think especially this happens when we're doing notes, we're writing notes if that's what you have to do. So that's the basis of peer drift. So how does it happen? It really does happen because there's confusion in the role. We're not really clear we may be clear about building the relationship, but we're not clear about what our role with that individual is and what our responsibility to that person is. For instance, we work with people who are in the hospital, right? So a lot of people will say that, when they're asked, they don't know why they're in the hospital or when they're going to get out. So normally what people do is they'll go and ask the staff, what is this person? Why is this person in here? When are they getting out? How is this working? Instead, what we do, and again, it's about the function, and part of the function is an advocate. So what we do is we work with individuals to request their treatment plan. And then we will sit down with them and go through the treatment plans to help them identify why they're there and what they need to be, or what the staff is looking for them to get out. And that really gives that individual a lot of power, because then they can decide, what their next move is. So for a lot of people, when they say, well, I don't know what I need to do to get out, when they read the treatment plan, it says in there, that the staff are looking for them to go to groups. Well, let's talk about that. Is there something you don't like about groups? What is it? And then start having that conversation and then helping them communicate that to the staff so that there's an understanding. It's not about us telling the person they have to go to groups. It's not about us telling the staff why you don't want to go to groups. It's really about empowering the individual that we're working with to speak for themselves and represent themselves and advocate for themselves. So, but those kind of roles are very different from the clinical role. And that's when we talk about having a very clear sense about your role and about the function of that role. So there's two kinds of peer drift, two categories, basically, organizational and individual. So an organizational peer drift is really about when non-peer colleagues marginalize peer support work, right? And I don't know, how many of you may have had this experience where, so a peer gets a job in this medical type setting and, they're asked to make copies, or they're asked to file, or they're asked to take notes at a meeting. They're not really engaged in the function of their job. And that's when you talk about being marginalized. The other piece of that is also when the staff, the clinical staff, kind of take more of a therapeutic role with the peer staff. So if someone's coming in late, you can have a clinical colleague turn around and say, is your medication making you sleepy? Are you upset? Are you stressed? Are you, all these kind of things. And that's where the role breaks down on the organizational side. And it's really something that we have to pay attention to, because the organization doesn't see it and they don't understand it. But we need to understand it so that when we experience it, we can turn around and we can say, not in an adversarial way. It's a difference between advocating and being an adversary, right? But in a way that says, you know what? That's really not an appropriate question to be asking me, and if you must know, I'm late because my car broke down. But that's something for me and my supervisor to discuss, and kind of just gently reminding people that they're not your therapist, that you appreciate their concern, but let's keep it in the lane. Let's keep it, as employees. The second one is, and it's a little bit about this other clinical piece being therapeutic, is the individual peer drift. So it's when the peer support worker, they don't mean to, but they take on the characteristics of a non-peer colleague. That's what we talk about drifting towards the clinical piece. So it's about when we start talking about, and look, this isn't easy stuff, because for the most part, as peer support workers, we're in the minority, right? So we could be sitting at meetings and we're not with a bunch of other peers. We're mostly with clinicians. And so when we're constantly hearing all of this clinical jargon, it's when we're not paying attention to it, it's easy for us to fall into, So it's a type of thing. Well, you seem very depressed today. And, are you taking your medication? And have you been going to the clinic? And have you seen your psychiatrist? All those kind of things where, as peers, we may turn around and be like, are you okay today? Is everything okay? And, maybe you just seemed a little sad or seemed a little off today. Is everything all right? Is there anything I can help you with? Those types of things. And it's coming from a position of caring, and not to say clinicians don't care, but I think you all know what I mean. It's about coming from a peer's perspective, about caring about what's happening with that individual. The other part of it is that when the people we're serving perceive us as more of a formal clinical role, like a sponsor or an informal therapist, and that's something we need to be diligent about, keeping those roles clear for the people that we're working with. That, no, I'm not your therapist, and I'm not your sponsor, but I can help you get a sponsor. If you want to talk to a therapist, I'm sure, I can help you make an appointment, those kind of things. But it's not, and it's hard for us because we want to give people the support they need when they need it. We don't want to say no, and there's other ways of saying that, and it's more about, instead of saying, no, I'm not your sponsor, it could be like, it sounds like, you really could be of use for a sponsor, in the 12-step programs. Is that something you might be interested in? This is what a sponsor does, and kind of lay it out for people so that they understand what they're talking about, and just as this idea of a therapist, it's like, no, but you know what? I can share my experience with you as you share it with me. And, maybe we'll learn from each other, and maybe my experience will help you move forward in your own recovery. Instead of saying, look, I'm not your therapist and I'm not your sponsor, it's kind of this putting it in perspective for people so that they can, recognize the difference. And you know what? The people that we're working with will appreciate your candor and will appreciate you being real with them. Okay. And the reality is, you may not want me as your therapist, kind of thing. So it's something that, it's important for us to pay attention to, because ultimately we have to take our own responsibility for the peer drift. We need to be that diligent about it. And if there's stuff happening on the organizational level, then that's what has to happen during supervision, when you're talking about it with your supervisor. So this
Melanie?
is, yes.
I'm sorry. You have a question in the chat. Would you
Sure.
like me to read
Sure.
it? Peer focus group said, I get this question a lot. How come we peers are doing the same tasks as a case manager? Any feedback on how to respond to peer staff on this would be greatly appreciated.
So let me just get clarification, if I can. So I think I know what you're saying is that, so we're saying is that you have peer supporters and you have case managers. Case managers have their own roles. There's an expectation a lot of times that the peer staff will do the role of the case manager. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So I run into this all the time. So here's the thing. First of all, then there can't be the expectation that peer workers are going to do the job of the case manager. What you want to do is a couple of things. You want to work in collaboration with the case managers. You also want to keep in mind what the individual needs. And this is where it gets a little sticky. For instance, we have people that when they come out of the hospital, they don't have SSI. Now, the case manager's job is to get the SSI, or excuse me, the food stamps. But the case manager, for whatever reason, they're busy, they have a high caseload, whatever it is, don't get that work done. However, we're also saying this person has no food. We need to determine at what point do we say, in this instance, for the well-being of the person I'm working with, I'm going to teach them how to get their own benefits. However, it can also be reported back or discussed back with the case manager and saying, look, this wasn't okay. This isn't my role. And you can't allow people to go forward without food stamps, without food, that kind of thing. So it depends on what the situation is, but the same thing applies, that you have to know what your role is, and you have to know what their role is, and you also have to know what the person you're working with needs. First and foremost, you want to advocate for that person with the case manager. I've had plenty of times where the peer bridges have talked to the case managers and they're still not getting a reply. They've talked to that case manager's supervisor. It's a tightrope, because you don't want to create this adversarial role, and it's a type of thing where you really have to have really good communication skills and able to talk to the case manager as a colleague, not as an adversary. Does that make sense? The other piece of that is, again, knowing what your role is and what your limitations are. For some people, they would not be able to go down and get food stamps with the person because they don't have a car, or they don't have the time, or it's not within their schedule, or any of those kind of things. So those are the things you need to know: your role, your limitations, the case manager's role, and what the person needs that you're working with. And then you balance those things. But to have the conversation with the case manager is ultimately the better piece, because you're developing a relationship with them as well. And that's for the betterment of the person you're serving. I hope that helps. Okay, so what are we talking about? What peer support workers do? They're a role model, right? They provide support during hospitalizations, transitions, crisis, and in the community. Not every peer worker does all of those things, but those are some of the examples of the work we do. We help people set goals and wellness planning. I don't know if you guys use the Mary Ellen Copeland RAP plans. That's a great tool to work with people on. We help people make connections and create other supports in their life. We support the individual with communicating with clinicians, just like I talked about before with the treatment plan, or going to treatment plan meetings. We help people write out a list of questions they may have for the treatment team this way. And if they want, we can go with them only if they ask us to help remind them about the questions they wrote down, because that can be an intimidating kind of environment. And we support the individual in just what I just said, in asking the questions to the treatment team and the discharge planning. What we do not do, we do not act like a sponsor or a therapist or a clinician. We don't assess, we don't diagnose, we don't treat an individual. And language is a really important thing. I've been around a lot of different peers, and peers will sometimes use that term, I'm working with this patient, or I'm treating this individual. That's not the language that we use as peers. We don't consider people patients. We consider people our peers or individuals who are struggling, but we certainly don't treat people. We're in relationship with people. We don't influence, and this is a big one, especially when you're working with clinicians and psychiatrists and therapists and the hospitals. We don't influence people's decisions towards medication or treatment, especially when they don't want them. I've had plenty of situations where, peer bridges will come back and say to me, Ellen, they want me to push Haldol to this individual. They want me to convince them to take it. I said, well, that's not your role, and it's more about, listening to what the individual wants. And that's your lead. That's your work plan, what that individual wants. And it's not our job to assimilate into other roles. Okay. Peer drift is covered in ethics and boundaries and in codes of ethics. So you should look at your own, or they should be anyway. They may not be called peer drift, but I'll show you what the New York State certification says in a minute. So the code of ethics is really the purpose is to guide the role of the peer specialist. So that's always something that you can look back on and get some surer footing when you're coming up with these kind of issues. And it's also to address the ethics and boundaries of peer specialists regarding peer drift. Now this is the New York State Certified Peer Specialist Code of Ethics relating to peer drift. It's that the peer specialist shall not engage in conduct that does not meet generally accepted standards of practice. That's the peer standard of practice. Okay. Then it shall not perform services outside his or her area of training, expertise, competence, and scope of practice, unless otherwise educated and trained, licensed, or certified to do so. The peer specialist also has a duty to accurately inform the person they support in recovery and healing that some information they provide may be shared with other team members. This is really important for the individual to understand the role of the peer specialist, because we talk about that at the relationship and things that are discussed for the most part are confidential. But when someone does talk about hurting themselves or hurting someone else, because of our role and because we work in this field, we are mandated reporters. That is something, but we have to be upfront with the individual we're talking with about this. Look, if this comes up, I just want you to know that I'll need to share that. I don't want you to not share with me, but we can talk about how we talk to the team about this. So it's the communication, right? So we're not saying, look, if you say this, I'm running to the team and I'm going to tell on you, kind of thing. It's really about, how do I help you get the support you need from your team, your clinical team? The other piece is to be knowledgeable about the importance of personal confidentiality of clinical records, and the procedures to help persons whom they support and heal access their clinical record. Say that makes sense? Okay. Do we have any questions at this point? Okay. All right. So this is really important, that peer specialists are not anti-clinical. We're not, anti-medication, we're not anti-treatment, we're not anti-anything, nor do we stand for anything. And this is what I've always, stood ground with, that we walk the middle of the road, and our purpose is about educating. It's not about telling somebody they should or should not do something, whether it's, go to treatment or take medication or take a certain treatment or whatever that is. I mean, I think we all have the experience when we look at the broader picture of peers in the mental health system, that it runs the gamut from being totally, for medication, to the other end of the spectrum saying, no, medication is horrible, it's bad, don't touch it, that's it. So, I actually walk the middle of the road. I'm more about, listen, this is what's happening. What do you think about it? Do you understand what it is? Let's see if we can get you more information about it, because our role is to help them make their own decision. It's not to do what we decide is best for them. And those are really clear guidelines. And again, all of this turns right around back to peer drift. So we have different relationships with the people we serve, right? It's not going to be the same as the clinical staff. We're coming from this, again, from our own lived experience and trying to understand the individual's experience. So here's a good example of, again, peer drift, when we're talking about even working with somebody and getting to know them for the first time. And I think so many people can agree and appreciate this. When we think about going to a clinician or a doctor for the very first time, I'm going to ask you guys to answer this. What is one of the first things they ask us to do? Don't be shy.
Jessica Hicks in the chat said paperwork.
Okay.
They want our history. They want us
They
to
want our
relive.
history. Exactly, Carrie. They want our history. So they want us to tell them our story. And how many times would you think that an individual has to tell their story in in a course of treatment.
Too many times,
Exactly.
but like 5 every time you meet somebody new, and it keeps people from wanting to go get treatment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A therapist leaves, a new one comes in. You
Yep.
tell their story. Doc leaves, new doc comes in, you tell their story. It's a constant thing. But this is where the relationship with a peer supporter is different. It's different. It's
Mhm.
about, so how are you? What's happening in your life? What is it that you want in your life? How can I help you get there? The information and the story is going to come out through our conversation with people. When you talk about, oh, have you ever tried this? No, when I did that, blah, blah, blah happened, da, 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 da. That's how we get to learn about people. When you meet a new friend or someone that might be a friend, you're not going to go down a litany of questions. Developing that friendship and that relationship takes time and takes communication with each other. Even new marriages, even old marriages, communication is a constant, source of basis for the relationship. Alicia?
Yes, hi, thank you. I work inpatient, and I often find, especially if somebody had just recently been admitted, they have had at least 5 people, I would say, like someone else had mentioned, within the first hour, maybe a little more. I don't go in unless my complex care manager actually asks me to, or until the attending doctors have verified that they want to talk to me, which is super helpful and helps kind of open the conversation easily, a little easier when I come in. And if somebody, especially if I see someone just walk out, a doctor or someone, I'll walk in and I'll say, hey, and I'll introduce myself. And if they say, oh, I just talked to so many people, I'll say, I understand. And, I'll say that I'm in recovery. And if it's okay, I would love to hear, your side of the story, or if I can sit down right now. And if it helps, I can open up a little bit and let you know about myself first. And I will also ask them, like, hey, I understand this is probably a lot. I can always come back later. And you can tell me if you're just not interested in talking right now. I want to give you, I just want to let you know, I'll totally understand. I won't think anything different. I can come back after, lunch today, or towards, the end of my day, or I can just see you tomorrow if that's okay. And so I'll give them the autonomy to choose right away, because when doctors come in and out, and the phlebotomists, I like to call them vampires, as I like to call them, they come in God knows how many times and what time in the morning and whatever. It's really hard to oh my gosh, I lost my train of thought. It's really hard to gauge whether someone, is, well, it's a little easy actually being a peer. It's hard, it's easy to say, I totally get it. There's no schedule. It's not like you have a schedule on the board. They tell you what your nurse's name, and if you're lucky, the right date. So so, and I'll just explain that to them, and just to let them know a little bit more, like, yeah, I have been in a bed before, so just try to break the ice a bit. And then certainly I love to get to know their personality and see if they're interested in 12-step groups. If they're not, I have a list of different organizations, and I have been to all of them. I frequently go to meetings, and the cool ones, I write down where I've been, and, I don't have to tell them where I'm from because I'm a peer.
Right.
Kind of qualify for all of the A's and the other ones, So, yeah, it's super rewarding. And I just really like to let them know, hey, I can come back and, and whatever. Yeah, sorry, long answer, but that's
okay.
that I like.
I will say this. So one of the roles of the peer bridgers is when somebody first comes into the hospital. And what they should be doing is that when they go in, they just go up to the person. They say, "Hey, listen, my name's Ellen. I just want to let you know that I'm here. I've been exactly right where you are,
Mm-hmm.
and I understand what's going on, and I'm here for you, and I will stay with you. I will come back. I will walk you through this process. You can count on me." And for that moment, for someone to say, "You can count on me and I'll be here for you," is something they're not hearing
Mm-hmm.
from the other folks that are coming in and out of their room.
Right.
So it's that initial, and you're absolutely right. It's that initial thing that you want to let them know, look, I've been where you are and I got your back. I know of this, So thanks for sharing. Smerillo.
Sorry, Sandy. I need to fix that.
That's okay.
So yeah, I was kind of reiterate what you said right now with the process, and like as myself as a peer, I've never worked within like clinic per se, but I've done a lot of groups at our emergency treatment services. But just being there and like pretty much not coaching per se, but just sharing that experience of like I've been here so many times, and just normalizing it as like this is where it got me. This is what I got from it. As kind of like that hope, right? That rapport that you're building of like, okay, well, she made it out,
Exactly.
And then telling them like, okay, first they're going to do this, then they're going to do that. And then debriefing afterwards when they get back and be like, how'd it go? Like, what can we do first not to go back? And second, if we do end up going back, at least we know like what to expect.
Right.
So,
right.
that's
okay,
it.
Great. Thanks. Thank you. So anybody else?
You've got some comments in the chat, but not
Sure.
questions. You want me to read them?
Sure.
Okay, Patty Marshall says, I've always resisted reading charts, quote unquote, reading charts, and prefer not to get the opinion of quote unquote others before I meet a peer. I usually tell peers how many different opinions and diagnoses I have had at the same time. So those opinions are just information I use to decide what feels credible and congruent with my own self. And I live new information that adds, I love new information that adds to my own self-awareness. Kathy Bigelow says, for me as a parent partner, allowing the parents to set how we contact and how they want us to communicate. It's hard for the clinical staff to understand our parents have people in and out of their home all day.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. So let's just look at that a second here. So this is around the relationships, with each other. So this is the role of the clinical staff, right? What are the roles? What is going to be helpful? What are the obstacles to those roles? And then when we're looking at the peer relationships, we want to ask ourselves, what's the priority of the bridger or the peer worker? What's helpful? What are the obstacles? And what are the peers' goals? Not my goals, but what is the person that I'm working with? What are their goals? And a lot of times when you're talking to somebody, especially on the admission piece, they're not going to have a whole lot of goals. I mean, think about it. When we were first in an admission unit, even if we'd been in there 10 times, we're in there, everything is swirling around us. It's not something that we can sit down and say, oh, yes, well, this is my goal and this is what I want to do. But that's not the experience, and that certainly wasn't mine. Many times as I went into the hospital during admission, that was not my experience at all, So let's talk about the clinical role, right? So they're about medication compliance. They're about treatment compliance, right? They're consequence driven. If you don't do this, then this is going to happen. We see that a lot in hospital settings, especially long-term hospital settings. I'll give you a great example of the difference. So of the peer in this case. So there's a gentleman who's on a long-term unit, and he's been there for quite a while, but he does not come out of his room. He doesn't really even get out of bed, except to go to the bathroom. And, you know, they actually bring his meals to him in the room because he won't get out of bed. So the peer goes and knocks on his door frame, doesn't walk into the room, hence another clear defining moment, right? Doctors and nurses just walk in the door. You know, the peer knocks on the door frame, says, "Hey, Mr. So-and-so, how are you doing today? You know, my name's Kevin. What's happening? You know, da, da, da." He may not get much of anything. He said, "You know what? That's okay. I'll come back tomorrow." And Kevin goes back tomorrow. And same thing, and continues to do this for months, And that is also what's different about peers, is that we're vigilant, you know, and we're persistent. You know, we're going to be there. If we say we're going to be there, we're going to be there. No matter where you're at, we're accepting that. That's where you're at right now. That's okay. So it took a couple of months, and the gentleman started to lean up on an elbow. Then he started to sit up. Then he actually put a shirt on. Then he put pants on. And then, you know, so the peer kept going back and forth and, you know, asking him, you know, "Would you like to go out? I can walk you out to the vending machine if you'd like. You know, you just got to put pants on, you know." So the person eventually did that. And Kevin was able to walk him out, go to the vending machine. The guy was getting stuff, came back in. He was happy as a lark. The next day, he was sitting up, waiting for Kevin, came out, you know, went to the vending machine, came out. By the third or fourth time they did this, the staff person, when this fella came back in onto the unit, staff person said to him, "Well, now that you can go to the vending machine, you have to go to 3 groups." Well, that was it. The gentleman went back to bed. And it started all over again. So that's a very clear, you know, difference between what we do and where the clinical piece is, because the clinicians are thinking, I'm not saying they're bad, but what I'm saying is that they're thinking, their mindset is that this person has to do this so that they get better. You know, that's their mindset. We think otherwise, but nonetheless. So that's an example of how that happens too. But the priorities for clinical staff is right, and I'm sure everybody's heard this because this is a Medicaid thing. You know, as soon as they get out of the hospital, within 7 days, they have to go to a clinic appointment, they have to fill their medication, and they have to meet with all these other providers. You know, that's the tunnel vision. Okay, where when we talk about the peer specialist, it's about, this is their life. It's not mine, it's theirs, you know, and it's our role is out of curiosity, out of discovery. What are the things you want in your life? You know, and who do you want in your life? And for a lot of folks, they may not know, especially initially. They may not know. So again, we go to our curiosity and say, well, what was your life like before this all started happening, before you started having hospitalizations? What were you thinking about your life would be? You know, those kind of things, and helping them start to reconnect with that, you know, and not let this whole hospitalization series redefine them. You know, it's okay if you change it, but what was it then? And where would you like it to be now? You know, and that's just not a curiosity or a discovery mode that clinicians enter into. You know, they move right to, you know, this is what's going to make you better. This is what you have to do. Take this medication, go to this program, and you know, do this, that, and the other thing. So, you know, and here's the biggest difference is that we work for the individual. We don't work for the hospital. We don't work for the doctor. We don't work for the therapist. We work for the individual that we're working with. And that's where our communication is based on too. You know, that look, I'm working with you. You and I are in this together. You know, I don't work for them. I'm here to help you get to where you want to be. Okay. So let's talk. Does anybody have an experience that you felt like you weren't sure what your role was, or that you know, what your experience the peer drift might have been? I mean, we've all experienced it on some level. And it could be that we find, if we sat back and thought about it, it's like, okay, well, I wanted to be accepted by the staff. So, you know, I did this or this because, you know, I didn't want them to think that I was against them. And I wanted to I wanted to impress them, to make sure they know I'm a valuable asset here, you know, and this is the line, right? I wanted to help people, but by doing that, you were doing it according to, you know, the clinicians, you know. So anybody want to share an experience that they may have had? Hey, Patty.
Okay, I got myself unmuted. Yay,
Okay.
I can work Zoom. Hey, hi, Ellen. Nice to see
Hi.
you again. For me, I think that my challenge is in supervision. It feels sometimes like it's soul crushing for me to bring people back in line with the peer role. Like they really are deeply attached to the helping role. And when I can hear it in how they talk about successes and how people and the way that they explain sort of their relationship. And I'm really I think I get peer drift, and I'm really struggling with ways to, in a strength-based way, communicate peer drift without crushing people.
Right.
You know, because sometimes I'm like, ooh, that sounds like that was great advocacy. However, maybe it should have looked more like self-advocacy, right? And that however part is just the part where I always take a deep breath and try to ask a lot of questions and see if they can come to some self-discovery. But it's, I don't know, just wondering, I'm for your wisdom in that, like peer drift when it comes to that relationship piece where they're kind of being people are becoming too much of a helper, like people are relying on them instead of relying on themselves to get change done in their life. Yeah, does that make sense to everybody? So that's kind of one thing with peer drift that I struggle with as a supervisor. So
yeah, no, that's a big issue. You know, it's about, you know, dependency. You know, we're about creating independence, you know, and interdependence. You know, we don't want, you know, this person to be solely dependent on me. That's too much of a responsibility for me, you know, and that, you know, where is, first of all, what I'd be asking the individual is, what kind of discoveries have you made about this person? You know, what have they shared with you through the process of your relationship? You know, because if the person can't really go there and really come up with some things, that's going to be telling to them, you know. And as supervisors, I think we need to come from a place of saying, you know, where's your curiosity? Where is, you know, the discovery piece? And it's not about what happened to you. It's about, well, what was it like when you were a kid? Where did you grow up? You know, those kind of things. It wasn't, you know, and start to, just like you would do with other people that you engage in a relationship with when you're starting. It's like, you know, oh, I'm from that area. What school did you go to? You know, those are the normalizing kind of conversations that we have. And those are what's going to lead us to you know, talking about the discovery around how we got to this place and what would we want to see different moving forward, and helping them do that. And I think that when we talk about being dependent on the individual, it's really about, you know what? It's great that you want to help that individual. What I'm concerned about, and I'm sure you're worried about it too, and that's what I would go with, assume that they do, I'm sure you're worried that you're the only one they're depending on. And that could be really harmful to them, because you can't be all things to all people, But have you had a conversation with them around who else is in your life that can be supportive to you? And in what ways? So who do you play with? Who do you go to games with? Who do you go to movies with? Who do you play cards with? Where do you go for your spiritual needs? Do you go to a church, a mosque, a temple? Those are the kind of curiosity, and that's the kind of discovery that, you want to help your specialists understand and become good at and become fluent in, because that's such a more natural fit. And then the other thing is too, the peer specialist can also always bring that back when something comes up. You say, hey, Jim, you know what? That reminds me, when you were saying this about that this helped you, is that something that, did I get that right? And those kind of things. It's always about putting the power back in the individual's hand, not holding it myself or letting the person give it to me. That help, Patty? Patty, leave the room.
She may be trying to unmute.
Oh,
Yeah, no, I
okay.
didn't leave the room. Sorry.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
I just don't have my best device to use today.
That's
So, yeah, it does help. And I think I've had some of those conversations. I think I was realizing as you were talking, so thank you for that. But I almost feel like I almost get in the same situation they're in, like where I'm feeling too much responsibility for them
right.
as the peer. Like that's it. It dawned on me as you were talking that I probably am modeling a bit of that need to rely on somebody. So that was a good reflection for me. And because I was thinking I don't always ask myself those questions. So
And the reality is too, as supervisors,
right.
Our job is to help the individuals we're supervising to be the best they can be.
Right.
And I think that's important to tell people that we're supervising. Say, this is my job. My job is to help you be the best. And I'm going to be asking you what you need for that, and those kind of things, so that they become, again, it's the same as if they're working with peers. They become part of their progress. Right? Was it Sandy Murillo?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
So I have one with like staff, and then I have one with actual clients when I was peer support. I'll always be a peer no matter what. But but with the staff, I remember way back when I started, I'm a very ancient peer. I'm very dinosaur-ish. Started off, and I was very young. And again, first office job, really, oh my God, So I remember mirroring the behaviors of the clinicians, mirroring kind of even little things like the way they walked or the way how they spoke to clients. Because again, back when we didn't have trainings on how to become a peer, it was more shadowing other peers and so forth. So this feeling of being a fraud, right? And not being very clear on what my vision was or whatever. And then there was a specific incident, and I'm not naming names, nothing like that. We're not here to like talk or whatnot like that. But I was told, because my diagnosis is schizoaffective. So as somebody, that's a really deep term for, clinicians. We're like, wow, like you're working, you got your bachelor's degree, like, wow, like,
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
so with that diagnosis. And so somebody, one of the clinicians, I remember it was like my first couple months there working, and she says, like, I don't think that's your diagnosis. I don't think that's what you have, because you present really, really well. You speak clearly. And, and again, I don't talk about like my war stories of with them. That's something
Right.
that I can be using when I need to with my clients, right? So that was huge, where like I somehow became embarrassed. I'm like, am I a fraud? Am I not diagnosed this way?
Right, right.
So, and then with now becoming a supervisor.
Well, let me hold you right there for a second.
Oh, yes.
I don't want to forget what I want to say to you about this. So, again, it's about one thing I want to say to you is that it's about how much power we put in the clinician's hands, right?
Mhm.
That makes us double, rethink everything and double think and all those kind of things. The other thing, what you said was, mimicking how they, oh, don't go off screen, come back.
Oh, okay.
How you may mimic how they behave, and I see that all the time. This is the biggest thing. This sends off flags and fireworks and everything else. When a peer says, and how does that make you feel? Right?
Yeah. I remember,
So
yes.
it's that. And, like, well, you have to be doing this, or you should be doing that. You need to do this. And why aren't you doing this? Especially when we're in a setting, like, for instance, a setting where there are groups being run and there's a common area, people hanging around and this kind of stuff. I've heard it over and over again. People come out and say, hey, you're supposed to be in this meeting. Let's go. It's about the tone. It's about everything. And it's very demeaning, and it's very parentified.
Yes. Because we are, at a certain sense, we are our job, like our life, our story, what makes us us, right? And so when somebody, breaks down our job, like, you're not doing this right, you're pretty much telling me that's I'm not okay, and that I'm not a good person, or so forth.
And
But
it's also diminishing you to you filling a role as a diagnosis instead of a valuable, member of the team.
Yes, I see that. So now as a supervisor, right? Like, I use that. I kind of go back to the past of like, I need these people to feel validated, to know their strengths, and if they need help using them, and going back to like the do with, not for kind of mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the end, that's where a lot of times I got messed up with, like, or misstepped, I guess you could say, with my clients, where I'm doing a little bit more. And so I created this thing when I worked with children, where the first meeting was where the boundaries were set. Again, this is going to be repeated over and over, but we say it in the first meeting, right? And we build those boundaries. I'm not going to work harder than you. This is your journey. We are person driven. And what does that mean? Who's that person? You are. And, making it fun, and also building that, independence in them. And that did help me a lot with doing with, not for, and not holding them accountable, but being able to identify the personal responsibility in their choices.
Yep.
And that's how I do it now.
That's great. That's great, Sandy. Thank you. Thank you for that. Anybody else?
Hi, this is Carrie. So that really brought up, I supervise 12 peers. And, I've had my own experiences, and one of my staff was really struggling with management, and, I'm that go-between, and I went to management, to our director, with his concern, and she was like, is this your concern or his concern? Like, because he had asked me to get a meeting with them, and
Right.
I wanted to be a part of it, and she didn't want me to be there, and it was really hard, because I was like, well, I told her, and she's a peer too, so it was easier to talk to her, but I told her, I said, well, this is his concern, but it's also my concern because it concerns, my staff.
Right.
And she ended up just going and meeting with him without me, and everything, is okay now. But realizing that that's okay to let them, go meet with management on their own. So that was hard. And this was, a really good reminder for me that I have to encourage them to leave the nest, I guess, so to speak. So kind of like with my kids,
Right. Yeah. But the other thing is too, that, right, we give people tools,
Right,
right?
right,
And so it's one of the things may be, well, that's great that you want to meet with them. Would you like help sitting down and kind of organizing your thoughts around this?
right.
Right? Because it can be intimidating. Yeah, you're meeting with the boss's boss, right?
Mm-hmm. The
So,
boss's boss. Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah.
So being able to then go in with some index cards or whatever, with some statements that you wanted to talk about or some questions you had, and that, your part in that could help them organize that a little bit better,
Mm-hmm.
or to ask the questions without being adversarial.
I
That
like
kind
the
of thing.
idea of index cards. Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome.
The same thing, that's what we do when we, may help people prepare for their treatment plan.
Right.
These people are involved in your life. Like, ask them the questions, and make statements, like, or, say to them, listen, I think I do this pretty well. Just because I don't go to groups, I hate groups,
Right.
that kind of stuff. So it's really about helping people, because it's the first time for a lot of folks. So just helping people prepare for it.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else?
You've got some comments in the chat, no questions. Let's see. Shani said, as a peer supervisor, I hope to create a team of peers who are confident, reliable, knowledgeable in their skills and abilities to do all aspects of the work as the crisis center peers and clinical staff and substance use disorder staff all do the same work: intakes, discharge, transfers, de-escalation. Let's see. Peer focus group said, being a peer supervisor, we also need our team of networking. Let's form and unite. And then Patty said, clinicians have done the opposite as well. 15 years ago, I worked with a clinician who said to a peer right in front of me, this is our peer. You and Patty have the same diagnosis and she's working and is okay. There's hope for you. My response was, he has no idea what he's talking about. I'm happy to share how life really is if you want. I got in trouble with the clinical supervisor. My supervisor was proud of me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was all.
And that is, listen, back in the day, one of the things we were doing was we had this hot dog truck, and we had it outside of the field office, which is from the state office in our area. And I was advocating for a better spot because they had us off in the woods, basically. And I wanted us to be where staff were coming in and out, so they'd buy the hot dogs, right? So I was advocating for that. And later on found out that the director of the field office called the person that was supervising us and said, who is this person and what's her case number? Because I want to look into this person. I don't know why she's acting like this, this kind of thing. And it was like, do you mean you want my case number? You know, like, really? You want to look up my hospital records because I'm trying to sell hot dogs? You know, so it's just like, but identifying people as their diagnosis. Listen, we do the same thing to ourselves, right? A lot of times you'll hear people say, hi, I'm Ellen, I'm a schizophrenic, right? And we really try to help people identify that as a part of, you know, their life, not about who they are, right? So yeah, that's definitely identifying people as a diagnosis is a problem for sure. But I think it was handled great, you know, Patty. That was awesome to say, you know, look, let me explain to you who I am. You know, I know best, you know, since it is my life, you know. So that was great. So who can talk about, I mean, we did talk about some of this to identify peer drift and how to adjust for it. Kind of had some of the discussion around that. But think about it for yourselves. You know, this is what peer drift. How do I do that? Do I do it? And how do I protect against it? And do I see it happening somewhere else? And you know, just to get more comfortable with identifying it for yourself. But there are ways that organizations can really help to manage against peer drift, and that is to provide very clear job descriptions, very clear career ladders with opportunities for advancement and things like that, and that really helps people reduce the confusion around their role. The other piece is to involve peer support workers in the program planning and training so that administrators and managers are familiar with the services they provide. Because the reality is, they're not getting trained. They're saying, oh, you're going to get a peer specialist or you're going to get a peer worker on your team. They have no clue what that means. And I think we can cut them a little bit of slack on that. But it's up to us to train them and to educate them on what we do. Okay. Again, for organizations, it's to provide the training and the education for non-peer staff on how to work with, how to supervise, and how to support peer workers. So it's not just about, you know, this is what we do. It's how do you engage in that supervision for when there are non-peer staff supervising peers. And to create and really uphold a defined code of ethics, you know, and a scope of practice. So that's something that, you know, in each of your states, I have a feeling that people are from all over, to look into your own state's peer accreditation. If you don't have one, look at a neighboring state to see if they do. You know, but I also agree with the comment about peer supervisors coming together and being able to talk about their struggles, you know, and their accomplishments in providing peer support supervision. And I forgot, I just lost my train of thought because I wanted to say something about it'll come back to me. You know, so, and I think that is really important. To come together. I know what it was. One of the things I do in supervision is I meet with each person individually, but once a week we have a team supervision. And part of that supervision is I make sure I leave enough time for people to bring up a situation that they're having difficulty in so that they get feedback from the other peers. I don't give the feedback. I just facilitate it, you know, but I allow them, you know, that space to really talk to each other about what's happening. One of the things I recently did was I created a peer lead, a peer bridger lead position that I gave to two people actually, because what their role is going to be is for people to call them as as things come up for them in dealing with the individuals and doing their job. Not the hardcore stuff, like the administrative piece of it, but just to be able to build that support within the team and from each other. So that seems to be going pretty well. So maintaining the role of integrity for the supervisors. So again, the supervisors have to be monitoring the roles of the peer support workers, and they need to do that really closely so they can pinpoint drift as it happens, so they can address it as early as they can before it becomes, part of the day, and before it becomes, this is a normal way of business. Okay. I know we're running out of time, so basically, I just want to say to you that if you're not talking about ethics and boundaries and peer drift and supervision, you're not using supervision well. As a peer support worker, you can ask for these topics to be discussed, because that is part of supervision, is to help you navigate that. This again is just the Peer Bridger lens. We support each other to get out of the hospital, stay out of the hospital, and get the hospital out of us. And again, I want to thank you. I hope this was helpful. I hope it helps you identify and respond to peer drift as you move forward in your careers. And feel free to reach out to me if there's any questions or comments you have. I'd be more than happy to respond to you. My email's up there. So I know we're running a little out of time, so I don't know if anybody had any last questions or if you had another workshop behind me.
I don't see other questions, but you're getting a lot of love in the chat.
Aw, thank you.
I'm gonna put your email in the chat, Ellen. Just
Yep.
anyone wants to copy and paste it. You're getting many thank yous. Awesome workshop, awesome session. And people really enjoyed this presentation. So great job.
I'm glad. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, go ahead.
No. It takes again, it's the relationship, right? So it's the give and take that makes it good. So thank you all for sharing.